Josh, I've been obsessed with consciousness for my whole life, and I've talked to a lot of scientists and philosophers, but I've never spoken to an experimental philosopher about consciousness. I'm a little skeptical of what you can tell me, but I'll listen.
Well, so what we're trying to understand is how people, ordinary people, decide which things are conscious and which things aren't. So you probably think that, for example, I can have feelings, that I could feel upset or experience pain or feel joy, but that this chair can't feel anything at all. So how is it that you decide that?
It just seems intuitively obvious that I project into you the same feelings that I would have, and I know how I feel, and I try to do that with the chair, and I can't do it.
Well, one of the things that we've been finding that's really surprising is that the role of the body in deciding whether things have consciousness. So if something doesn't have a body, if it doesn't have flesh, if it isn't biological, we seem to think that it can have certain kinds of psychological states, that it can think and intend, but not that it can actually feel anything.
So we can talk about a computer, for example, a supercomputer in the future. And the question is it conscious? People ask that question. So what you're saying is that the perception is that it can do certain things, think, be intelligent, make decisions, but it's not conscious, people would say, because it doesn't have a body. Well, suppose we made a computer that looked like it had a body.
Right. That is a really good example. So if you ask people about a robot that behaves exactly like you, so it's like Robo-Bob, it can interview people for closer to truth as well. It will say exactly the same things that you do under every circumstance. If you ask people about that robot, can it plan, can it intend, does it have beliefs? They think it has all of those states. But if you now ask it, can it feel happy? Can it feel depressed? Can it actually experience pain? Then people say no. But you raised a really interesting question. What if you put flesh on the outside of the robot? So you say inside there's the CPU, but outside it looks exactly like you. Then people start actually, surprisingly enough, thinking that it can have feelings. So even though it's a computer inside, if it looks biological, it seems to be that is the trigger for thinking that it has feelings.
Does this help us understand consciousness, or does it help us understand the irrationality of the way all people think at different times?
Well, one of the questions that philosophers were mostly concerned with when they were wondering about the nature of consciousness was the question, is it really a matter of just the way that we behave that makes us conscious? Or is it something about our actual physical makeup, the way in which we're embodied, the fact that our brain is made of this sort of substance as opposed to, say, silicon? What we seem to be seeing in these results is that for certain kinds of states, for things like believing, planning, intending, it doesn't matter what you're made of. For other things, say feeling upset, feeling afraid, it does matter. It matters that you have a body. You can see it, for example, also if you just look at corporations. So a corporation doesn't have a body. Now suppose we ask what kinds of psychological states Microsoft can have. So you can say, can Microsoft intend to release a new product in July? Sure. Can Microsoft believe that one of its main competitors is Google? But now, can Microsoft feel depressed? Can Microsoft experience joy? Since Microsoft doesn't have a body, people seem unwilling to say that it has these states.
So what's happening here? Is it that we are changing our understanding of the word consciousness in a popularist sense? Or does it go deeper than that? And then when philosophers actually try to carefully define consciousness, that they too bring over some baggage from the normal human existence, so that they are maybe being influenced on how they are defining consciousness themselves, and so have to be extra careful.
I think the second suggestion that you made is exactly right. That the way philosophers try to answer these questions is often by constructing a thought experiment. And then they'll say, well, in this thought experiment, obviously such and such is true. And in many cases, it does seem obvious. But now you want to ask, why does it seem obvious? And maybe it's actually not so obvious why it's obvious. That what makes it seem so obvious are these kind of tricky aspects, these puzzling things about our ordinary human cognition.
So if our ordinary human cognition is bringing aspects of irrationality, or let's say non-rationality, into the definition, we just have to be extra careful that those types of things are not affecting how we do our deep work.
Right, at least if you think that it's a mistake to be concerned about the body in this way.
Or, however, I mean, what you're telling me is that there are some mistakes being made, or there are some things being made in these kinds of definitions of consciousness, which we didn't know,
Right.
that comes from our ordinary human cognition. So we just have to be careful. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, we don't know, but if we don't know that that's why we're doing it, we'll never know.
Right, exactly. So if we have a better understanding of how it is that we're ordinarily thinking of these things, then when we're trying to do careful scientific work about them, we might decide to ignore certain aspects of our perception. And in fact, these kinds of situations can actually have a more practical impact. So in some of our recent studies, it turns out that even just thinking about you, the more aware I become of your body, the more I'll be inclined to think that you're actually capable of feeling things.